Najee Harris spoke about the Steelers' offensive identity and where they're at from coming over from last year. And Diontae Johnson talked about what he's been working to improve upon with Kenny Pickett. To talk about that with me, I've got Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. I'm your host, Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And we are joined, as I said before, Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. He's always here every week. We love having you on, Alan. Alan, we finally got a chance to talk to a couple guys who we didn't get the chance to talk to in OTAs and really haven't talked to since the end of the season last year, and that was Najee Harris and Diontae Johnson. Now, we're going to lead with Najee Harris and what he talked about, because he was asked of a lot of things. Alan, you wrote an interesting piece about the coming, contract situation with Najee in a couple years here, that the Steelers are going to have some interesting questions about how they're going to face that. We'll get to that later, but I think the right now thing that was very interesting was how Najee Harris talked about where they ended up last year and how that's transitioned over to this year. Here's Najee Harris from Tuesday when the Steelers opened minicamp up and we got a chance to talk to him.
I feel like we found our identity. Early on we didn't know what we were. There was a lot of stuff going on, especially the quarterback position, just bringing new guys in. Really, we didn't have our identity when we're trying to look for it. And I think later on after that bye week, we kind of figure out what we do best. And that's, playing Steelers football. That's what we do. We run the ball. We have a good defense. We got good players on the outside, so we try to get them the ball in space. We try to get the deep balls downfield. But, we got to control the line. We got to control, just that rushing attack, so we can put more pressure on the defensive coordinator and figure out what to do. If they want to stack the box, then we got people on the outside. If they want to, play six-man box, and we can run the ball. I think we just got into an area where we found out who we are. It starts in practice. It starts in the locker room. It starts in film. We got to keep pressing. We got to keep, doing the small things, the little things, going on meetings. We got to keep knowing that, from where we were last year, off that bye week, us is really getting into the details, us really keying in on what we need to focus on, us working on the small things, like for me, my alignments and everything like that, all the little small details that play a big role. I think all that stuff plays over to the game. In the game, it should be easy. It should be just be execution, and that's where, I think we got better at last year. So, just going into camp, I feel like all of us we know exactly what we are. We know exactly what we need to work on. We're doing a lot with the guys we have here, especially the new guys. We got Calvin back. I think I'm excited about that. Calvin's a kind of a unicorn. You could put him really anywhere. Put him in the backfield, that slot, everywhere. So, he could be. I think he's going to be featured a lot. He's going to put a lot of pressure on defenses. That will help out all of us, just seeing him line up everywhere. So, I'm excited for this year, especially the guys that we got coming in.
So, Alan, it's a lot to take in with Najee talking about there, because he addressed several different things. But I think we can start with the base part of him talking about the identity and then finding it last year. How much of their actual rushing identity you think actually is going to carry over from last year, as far as Najee Harris understanding how to hit the holes with this offensive line and the progress the offensive line made themselves?
Well, yeah, I think they go hand in hand with the moves this team made this offseason, right? I think they found what they could be good at. But I think we're kind of like, on one hand, like a little bit overstated. Like, they still weren't good at running the ball in the second half of the year. They were above average, but it's not like they were some dominant rushing team. But I think what they did was they found something that they thought they could be good at, and then they went out and added players, Isaac Seumalo, Broderick Jones, Darnell Washington, and Allen Robinson, really good blocking wide receiver, that might make that into an actual strength. I obviously appreciate Najee a lot. I think identity is what you can be good at, right? And not every team can be good at everything, and some teams don't know what they're good at and they get it wrong. But a lot of teams just aren't good enough to be good at anything, and I think that's what the Steelers were last year. I think they've added pieces that allow them to have an identity this year, where they really can be a team where not just do they run the ball a lot, they ran the ball a lot last year, but they run the ball effectively on a rate basis. I think that's the big thing that we haven't seen from this group yet. If they can average, and league average was 4.5 yards per carry last year. If they can get to 4.7, 4.8, okay, now we're talking about a part of this offense that is now a dangerous weapon that other teams are going to have to game plan for, are going to have to relax assignments in other areas and hedge towards that run. Like that to me is what an identity is when a team has to prepare for that area of your game and they do so at their own detriment in another area. And I think that's how the Steelers can really make the running game their identity. But I don't really think we've seen that yet.
I think that we've seen glimpses of it, like the Panthers game last year. You're talking about like the way that they've been able to finish the game. But like, I also don't think that the offensive line has been dominant enough to be there yet. And I think that there's still progress that needs to happen. And something that I pointed out, during the season last year, there was a stretch, Najee Harris wasn't getting 100 yards rushing. And, I pointed out that I was like, go back and look at Derrick Henry's first and second year stats. And it wasn't exactly all that until he started popping off with the right mix of the offense that the Titans had put together over time. And I'm not saying that Najee Harris is about to have some Derrick Henry seasons, but I do think that there's continuity brewing in the Steelers rushing offense, and as it continues to brew, more opportunities will be there and bigger plays will be there, which will produce the numbers they're talking about, and that will be their identity. But it's something they do still have to work on. It's not a given from the end of last season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what this offense needs. I think to have any other kind of identity is putting too much on Kenny Pickett too soon. It has to be the running game. Like that has to be the thing that propels them forward first, and then they can build off that running game with some play action passes, some getting Kenny on the move, some of those deep plays to Pickens, especially if you can talk about taking a safety out of the equation by getting teams to move a guy up in the box. I think if we see some of that, then we'll really have a Steelers offense with an identity. I think to this point, we haven't seen one with Matt Canada as the offensive coordinator. I think I've seen intent about things that they want to do and things that they're trying to do. But to me, it has not become a point where they're a problem for another team's defense. And that's really where they need to be. I think they have the opportunity to do that this year. I really do. I think they're going to be much, much, much better run blocking team. And I think we saw some things from Najee Harris last year. And let's include Jalen Warren in that as well. I think they have a nice 1-2 punch there where it doesn't have to be like 2021 where Najee Harris led all NFL running backs in touches in order for the Steelers to run the ball a lot. I think they can keep him fresh as well over the course of a season. So I think they're in a good place to be a good running team this year. But, obviously, I think a lot of people think they're in a good place because it's June 13th,
Exactly. It is very early. Najee Harris talked a little bit more about some things. We'll get to those in a minute here, as well as get some words from Diontae Johnson, who reported to minicamp for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll talk about that and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about our great sponsors at FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. The NBA Finals are over, and it looks like the NHL Finals are about to be over as well, as we're recording this during a blowout, what it looks like from the Golden Knights, which means Major League Baseball and soccer are going to be your primary options here for betting on. But hey, FanDuel's got you covered there too. Again, they're America's #1 sportsbook, and if you're still new to FanDuel, you can get a no sweat first bet for $2,500 back in bonus bets when you sign up for a new FanDuel account today. And again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. When you sign up today, you claim your no sweat first bet, and it'll give you all the opportunities to bet on your favorite players, your favorite teams, your favorite games when on the sportsbook app. And when you do, you're doing so on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So don't miss your shot at a no sweat first bet up to $2,500 back in bonus bets that you get if your first bet doesn't hit. And you can do that by joining FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, wanted to talk a little bit about, I didn't want this to be the whole show was about Najee Harris, but a little bit about his conversation about the running back position and how it's just a devalued position in the NFL these days. Dalvin Cook was released despite having 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons for the Vikings and being a huge part of why they were even good. And now a lot of people keep talking about it. Saquon Barkley's talking about if he doesn't get the deal that he kind of wants, maybe he sits out the season. And Najee Harris talked about, he's like, he doesn't understand it because, the running backs, they have to do so many different things. He compared them to a queen on a chessboard because they can go in so many different directions, at least the really good ones, the multi-talented ones. And, he talked about it and he didn't get too far into things, but he did explain his position on that. And that's natural because that's his position. That's the group and he's right that these are some supremely talented individuals, but the market is the market when you look at the NFL and how running backs are getting treated and also just how they're lasting. Because the issue that I think everyone looks at is that, when you draft a cornerback in the first round, you usually get that cornerback. If you hit on that guy, you usually get him for 8 to 10 years as a star player. You draft a running back in the first round and you hit on that, you might get 5 or 6 years of that guy's prime, at least when you compare it to other guys that have been in that position. Now, when you were listening to Najee Harris's points on that conversation, did you feel like he had merit in some of the things he was saying there about running backs and what they go through? And how do you see this playing out long term with the Steelers and Najee Harris? Because he's entering his 3rd year, which means after this season, the 5th-year option will becoming a question.
Yeah, I think there's kind of 2 different things here. We've been having the running back in the first round of the draft conversation for a little while, and I think the points you brought up there are really fit for that. When you're drafting a guy early in the draft, you want a 10-year player. That's what you want. You want a guy who's going to be, 2 or 3 contracts with your team and be a starter and hopefully a Pro Bowler for a long time. And just, historically, we have lots of data. Running backs don't last that long. Like, that's just not going to be what you're going to get out of that position in all likelihood. So I think there's a lot of merit to that conversation. And I argued that the Steelers should not have drafted Najee Harris for that reason. But I think what we're seeing with Dalvin Cook is something totally different. Like, the Vikings weren't being asked to get 10 more years out of Dalvin Cook, right? Like, he was already under contract, and while it was an expensive contract compared to most running backs, it was not an expensive contract compared to like an average dominant starter around the NFL. And I don't understand what is happening right now with the running back free agent market. I don't see that big of a, I see the reasoning behind not wanting to take running backs early in the draft. I don't understand not wanting Dalvin Cook on your football team in 2023.
Yeah.
I don't get it. He's really, really freaking good. I mean, he's a 1,000-yard guy. He's been healthy. He's been, like everything you could want a guy to be. And so to me, like this part of it feels, and this is why I think Najee is dead on. If you want to talk about the longevity of the position, statistically speaking, I think there's some merit to that. But when you're dealing with free agent contracts, you're not talking about a 10-year career for a guy. You're talking about 3 or 4 years or 2 years or whatever. And it does not make sense to me. I do think that, Dalvin Cook is being undervalued. It looks like Ezekiel Elliott is being undervalued. Now, part of that is timing, right? These guys got cut. They came after the first wave of free agency. Maybe if Dalvin Cook and Ezekiel Elliott were there, Miles Sanders doesn't get that contract and somebody else does. I don't know. But it just does not. And even that contract for Miles Sanders, the guy who took the Eagles to the Super Bowl and a pretty financial reward for that guy hitting free agency. I think there is something that does not quite add up when it comes to the way the running backs are being valued in the free agent market right now to me.
I hear you.
And it's going to be an issue for the Steelers and Najee Harris. Like there's no question about that because, their choices are basically going to be either greatly overpay compared to the market or really, really piss off your first round draft pick. Like those are the two cards that Omar Khan is going to be holding. And good luck, sir.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough one. And Najee Harris is a guy who I think he knows his value. And and here's the thing: if Najee Harris plays well in the next 2 years, it becomes even just this year, it becomes a very tough discussion and about what you do. And the Steelers, they are already paying TJ Watt. They're already paying Minkah Fitzpatrick. Maybe some space opens up if like a guy like Cam Hayward retires. But you're already paying guys. And like the year after, when you're thinking about starting to have to pay Najee real money, you're gonna soon have to start paying Kenny Pickett real money if he becomes the quarterback of the future. And I know there's a lot of ifs. George Pickens is going to be up there. There's going to be, again, it's going to be some tough calls to make there for the Steelers. And it all depends, I think, on can Najee Harris be the guy that gets things going. But let's talk a little bit about another guy that's a big part of this offense, that Diontae Johnson. He hadn't been at OTAs for a chance for us to talk to him, but this is the first time we've gotten a chance to talk to him since the season began. Here was Diontae Johnson in the Steelers locker room on a Tuesday when minicamp was kicking off.
Putting out there, what have you been working on?
Overall, everything really. Pretty much my main focus has been yards after catch. I want to show that I can really run with the ball in my hands and show that breakaway speed. So I've been doing a lot of running. But that's really the main focus. But I've been trying to work on everything because you can get better at everything. I'm not trying to just focus on one, but trying to hit it a little here and there. So I'm ready.
I know it's only 3 days, but what's your goal in terms of continuing to develop chemistry with Kenny?
To get the timer down, and also build a better off-the-field relationship with him, and that's not forced, but it's going to happen over time. But that's my guy, though. But, you know what I'm saying, just that, and then just allowing him to just trust me, knowing I'm going to be in the right spot, and just when he's deciding to throw to me, knowing I'm going to make that play for him.
I think it's interesting. We'll get to the Kenny Pickett part of this when Diontae Johnson talked about scoring, or making plays with the ball in his hands after he's gotten open, because that's definitely he has no problem getting open. You and I have talked about that, and his drops problem isn't nearly as bad as I think some people make it out to be when you compare it across the league to guys that get a lot of high volume of targets. But I think a big part of what does need to happen is his yards after catch need to be better, and some of that isn't necessarily Matt Canada giving him routes that are giving him situations that work. It's because he hasn't been good. He's been running. People point out when he runs backwards, he gives up yards, and he hasn't been able to capitalize there. I mean, last year, according to Pro Football Focus, he had the 41st most yards after catch for receivers, and that was 243 yards. That was tied with Marquise Brown. And if you're Diontae Johnson, you're the number one receiver on a team, you want to have a lot more than that, because that's often how you get your touchdowns. And of course, he didn't get any last year.
Yeah, I think, some of that is the scheme a little bit. I think, that there's going to be times where he's not really given the ability to get a lot of YAC, but he definitely can be better in those areas. I think he just needs, they need to find a way to get him into some more space. And it's hard. Look, defenses are trying to take him away. It's, he is the guy. You want to talk about an adjustment. And really, despite the Steelers making, the running game the kind of their priority, like you could still see, remember that Panthers game, like, that was like the one time all year when another team did not try to take away Diontae Johnson aggressively. Like they put Joe Horn on George Pickens, and then Diontae lit him up. And, that was one of the few times I think where, he was really given, the defensive opportunity but he's got to be able to beat some elite guys. I think that's, he can get open, but he's not getting open and getting, additional yards. Some of that is the timing with Kenny too. I think there's some real stuff to that. But I do think a lot of what happened to him was just a product of the overall offense that was not just about Diontae Johnson last year, for sure.
No, I agree with that assessment. There was a lot going on there. Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, Matt Canada, the limitations they were trying to do. They weren't trying to throw the ball as much, in different parts of the field. I agree with you. There are a lot of points where it's not just on Diontae Johnson, but I think he's also ready to kind of prove that it wasn't him. And he's a guy. He kind of did his own thing throughout the OTAs period. Now he's back with the Steelers, and he's getting that. I think it's just a big question: is how good can he be this year? Because if you think back to Diontae Johnson's career, he really hasn't had the chance to be a prominent receiver with a really good quarterback with the Steelers, because in 2020 was the closest he had it when Ben Roethlisberger was playing well for that first part of the season, but then his knees started to give out. He wasn't playing as well. He couldn't throw as many deep balls, and that kind of limited Diontae Johnson. His first year was 2019 when they had Devlin Hodges and Mason Rudolph. His second year was 2020 when that happened. 2021 was Ben Roethlisberger's worst year when he was, basically just an old man kind of hanging on out there. And then 2022 was Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett. And, I think when we think of a lot of Steelers receivers who prove a point or do really well, there's a quarterback up in that mix that was a difference maker. And I think that they've been lacking that difference maker at that position. And not to say that Ben Roethlisberger isn't a difference maker, but at the point that Diontae Johnson played with him, it was a very limited version of Ben Roethlisberger. And, maybe Kenny becomes that, soon for the Steelers, but I think that's a significant part of what Diontae Johnson has gone through with the Steelers.
And I just don't think they've had an offensive scheme that was really tailored to his skills either. I'm not sure they still are this year. But I just think, like, if Diontae Johnson had played with Tampa Bay the last 3 years, he'd have had like 5,000 receiving yards.
Yeah.
It's not the kind of offense where he is going to make the most of his talents. I think that's clear. It's much more suited to a guy like George Pickens or a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster, right? Where big physical guys that can go up and make contested catches. It's not like the Steelers just don't do enough in terms of like spacing and the way they run their routes, where Diontae can get those like big acres of free space that he needs to really capitalize on his ability to get open and then maximize his yards after the catch. So I mean, there's all of that. I don't think he's had great quarterback play, but I do think that there becomes a point where if Diontae Johnson is really a great wide receiver, and I think he should be, he's got to find a way to overcome some of this stuff. If you need the right scheme and someone to take some of the defensive attention away from you and the right kind of quarterback for you to have elite numbers, then maybe you're not an elite wide receiver. Maybe you're just really good. And I think I think eventually we need to see that from Diontae Johnson. If we're going to talk about him like an elite wide receiver, because I don't think he's gotten there yet.
No, I agree. He still has ways to go, but I want to talk about not just getting there, but also who can be a leading voice for this group, because we just talked about Najee Harris. We've talked about Diontae Johnson, but where does Kenny Pickett stand? Who's going to be the galvanizing force, the galvanizing presence that everyone kind of rallies around this offense? We'll talk about that in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm Chris Carter with Alan Saunders. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, I was thinking about this the other day, and then I was like, you know what? We could talk about this for a bit on the show, that we don't know who's going to be the rallying point of this offense. We know that Cam Hayward's kind of that guy for the whole team, and he's especially that guy on defense. But the Steelers, for their offense right now, they have a lot of different talented guys that you have a lot of confidence in, but I think they need a guy that can boost everyone else's confidence. I think they need a guy who's going to be that leader, and maybe it could be Najee Harris, maybe it could be Kenny Pickett, maybe it could be Pat Freiermuth. I don't know, but I think there needs to be a voice, and I think it's a good question to see who steps up there. If it's Kenny Pickett, I think it says a lot about his ability to prepare, and it could mean for a very good career coming up for him. But I also think that he's a second-year player, and they've got some older guys, and maybe they defer to those guys as far as leadership.
Maybe it's like Connor Hayward, like just somebody out.
That would be okay. Get out of here. Leave. You just don't understand Connor.
Connor's like about the least that guy.
Right.
I think it's Kenny Pickett. I have been.
You think it is Kenny?
I've been super impressed by Kenny this spring. You know, like, look, the pass rush isn't real. It's hard to really evaluate what's happening, but he just looks like that guy we saw at Pitt in 2021, where he is so confident, in complete control of the offense. He's not deferring to anyone. It's not like he's not asking questions anymore. He's putting guys into places. You know, I think last year when you saw Kenny Pickett, like there was something that didn't happen right. Like, you know, oh, well, it would be like, what happened? Why didn't that, like, okay, where do I need to learn? What went wrong? Now when something doesn't go right, Kenny's pissed. And like, I think that's like
a good thing.
That's exactly who he is, right? And I think that's, you know, we've talked before. I really thought that part of his character was sort of the no-brainer part of drafting him, and I'm really seeing it in spades this spring. Najee Harris talked about it a little bit today. He's like, he's not a rookie anymore. Like, he doesn't look he acts like a vet now, and I think we're gonna see a pretty different Kenny Pickett this year. Maybe not necessarily in terms of like direct on the field results, although I think we will see some improve there, but just in the sort of way that he has command of his huddle and this offense. And like, you know, there are a lot of veterans on this team, guys that have been there and done that, where maybe you would think like, oh, he's only a second year guy, like, but they're all on defense. Like, all of the guys that could be that, like, the big leaders of the team, TJ, Cam, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Patrick Peterson, you know, like those are been there, done that guys, but they're all on defense. Like Isaac Seumalo, he's probably the most experienced guy on the offense, a really quiet guy, like not that type of raw guy who's going to do that. I really think it will be Kenny Pickett for this offense.
I think it could be too. You know, you and I have both been singing his praises since his Pitt days about his leadership abilities. And I think that's even maybe the most exciting part of him, because when you talk to Mike Tomlin about Kenny Pickett, he often talks about the way he processes, the way he leads. When the Steelers drafted him, he referenced how Kenny Pickett brought together the Pitt locker room and kind of broke away a lot of divisions that had been holding them back. And, you know, that was a big part of that unit kind of growing together and then winning an ACC championship and doing what they've done. But I agree with you. I think that Kenny Pickett could be that voice. I don't think it has to necessarily, be an elder statesman. I don't think it needs to be someone.
It's a young offense too.
There's
not that many older guys,
right?
And he was an old rookie, so I mean, it's not like is he even old? Like him and Najee are about the same age, aren't they?
I believe they are. Yes.
Yeah. So like, yeah, I think it's him. I really do.
I hear you on that. And if it is him, and if he is leading, I think it puts the Steelers in a comfortable position with the offense, because if he is doing that and he's having success, really think the Steelers could the offense could take some serious steps forward. We've already been talking about how they're already way ahead from where they were this time last year. Kenny Pickett's told us that they're doing 5 or 6 different installations of plays and things they're working on, compared to they were doing about 1 or 2 this time last year. Kenny Pickett's talked about it. Najee Harris has talked about it. I think that this could be a group that's special, but I think that they do need that vocal leader that kind of sets the tone. And if Kenny Pickett is that guy, I think it could really be something good for the Steelers moving forward, that Kenny Pickett becomes that guy and then he becomes the tone setter moving forward.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we saw it. You know, we saw him do it at Pitt. I think that's why it's easy to project him into that role.
Yeah.
And so I like, you know, can't really talk about like what exactly we saw today, but like, man, he
looks good.
He looks good. He looks really good.
Absolutely. We'll have a lot more to talk about too, because day 2 of minicamp is coming Wednesday. Alan will be there. I'll be there. Thanks so much, Alan, for everything that you always do and for the time that you make here to be on the show. Let people know they can find you, follow you, get more of your work.
Yeah, at @Saunders_PGH on Twitter, at PGH Steelers Now is the site, SteelersNow.com. Lots of stuff there. Like way too much to run down here, but like 15 stories from the first day of minicamp and probably more than that tomorrow. So yeah, keep checking it out.
Absolutely. Do check it out. They're doing a great job there at SteelersNow.com. I'm your host, Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. You can find this show on your favorite podcasting app and on YouTube. You can also check me out at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where I cover all things Pitt athletics. And you can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Thanks, everyone, for checking us out on this Wednesday episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll be back tomorrow, recapping day 2 of minicamp, and then back on Friday, breaking things down on what went right, what went wrong, and what we have our biggest takeaways of this minicamp experience has been before the Steelers take off and they start getting ready for August in training camp. Thanks again, Alan. We'll see you guys soon on the next episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast.